Ready? Okay. Okay. Good afternoon, not evening yet, but it'll be here soon. Today is Thursday, October the 6th at 3 o'clock. We are meeting to have a Planning and Zoning Committee meeting. We have two things on our agenda. So I guess we're ready to get started. Do I have to tell who's here?
Yeah, I'll take a roll.
Okay, so people present on council are the mayor, Skip Lyles, Melanie Long, and Brandon Whitfield, who is on the committee. And then that's it. Don't have to tell you about it. Okay, well, that's good. Okay, so there has been some discussion in the past about builders coming in and cutting down all the trees, just leveling it out. So we are here to consider creating a tree ordinance. We already have some requirements already in place. So if they cut down trees, if they clear the land, they have to plant at least 2 trees per house, per resident. So that's already in existence. Then I guess if depending on the size of the tree, what they have to replace it with, as far as it says a sliding scale on the number of trees required for a parking lot for commercial business. We do not have anything to prevent the clearing of trees from a lot of land before it is developed. So we don't have anything in place right now for that. I know this is something that some of the citizens were disappointed about when Freddy's came in and cut down all the huge big trees out front. While there are already some tree ordinances in place, from what I've seen, it's going to take some fine tuning to have these ideals come up with a vision that the council can see for the city. So I would like to propose that we take a full council the idea of putting 60-day memorandum on all land distribution permits inside our city limits to allow staff to develop a tree ordinance for the council's consideration. So today we're here as a committee to talk about what we want to see in this ordinance, because Tim's got to come up with something that we can all agree on and be happy with. So Danny's got a lot of information for us as far as what Gwinnett County has done, and he's looked at other cities. I don't know what all he's going to bring, but I know that he gave us a printout on gave me a printout on what Gwinnett County does. So Danny, I'm going to turn it over to you and let you give us some information.
All right, so I'll probably have Tim come up here because he's been working on it. But the reason we're here today is for the three of y'all to give us direction. For one, do you want us to work on a tree ordinance? And I think that needs to be done first. I think we all agree that you want it, but in order for me and Tim to create an ordinance to take before the city council, I need at least 3 council members to say, Danny, work on this. So with that being said, wouldn't y'all like to make a motion for us to talk about it? And there can be discussion, but you don't have to do it now, but I think we all feel that that's y'all's plan, is for us to do a tree ordinance. So we'll talk about that. Second part of it is, if the answer is yes, you would like to see a tree ordinance, then we would have to put a land disturbance moratorium on permits. So that means for anybody coming here for any type of building that requires a land disturbance permit, it would be a moratorium for X amount of days. We suggested 60 days. Tim and I think that's enough time for him and I and Robbie to look at different cities, different counties, and come up with a plan of a tree ordinance to present to the council in the November meeting. So the way Tim and I kind of looked at it as a tree ordinance, there is anything from extreme multi pages of ordinances to the simplest of ordinance to nothing. Some cities have nothing. Similar to us, they have, you have to plant a certain amount of trees for spaces, certain amount of trees for the houses, but there's really no clear direction of what you can and can't cut. So this all started with a discussion of Gwinnett County has a tree ordinance, and they do, and it's a very complex ordinance. It's one that I think Tim and I kind of agree that we need to look at and model it and If that's something you are willing to do, then I would ask also, part of this is Precision Planning is willing to help us create an ordinance with the caveat that it would not exceed my limit of $7,500. And there is a agreement that I would, have to tell him to proceed. And talking with Precision Planning, theirs is, I don't think you need to be as complex as some of the counties or cities, but, you can keep it as simple as possible. And we like simple here. I think, it's not complicated because we don't have the resources that, say, Gwinnett County has. They have certified arborists on staff. They have certified landscape architects on staff. We have that, not have that. We would have to subcontract that with someone, if we could find anyone, to do that. And if you know, landscape architects are like engineers, it's costly. So we don't want to go down that road. I don't think we want to, but that's y'all's decision. So we would like to propose just what Tim and I saw was hardwoods is what I feel that I've heard from y'all is you would like to preserve. And with that hardwoods is there's definitions for hardwood trees and also specialty trees. Pine trees is not a specialty tree. It's considered a softwood. They grow very rapidly and very abundantly. Oak trees, on the other hand, don't. It takes many years, if not decades, for oak tree to reach maturity. So Gwinnett has was it 36 inches across? So 36 inches across from point A to point B. Anything above that, they cannot cut. If they do cut, there's two options. There's a fine, or they have to replant that tree. And if they replant that tree, there's so many trees they have to plant to equal that calculation of that tree. That's where it gets into a bunch of sliding scales. It gets a little bit more complicated. So I'd like to use something similar to that, where we're not going out surveying the entire lot of counting trees, which that's what Gwinnett has. They have a certified arborist that goes out and measures the trees, count the trees. I would suggest that if a developer comes here, we require them to have a third-party arborist go out to evaluate the trees, come back with a plan saying, we have 10 acres we want to develop. Out of that 10 acres, X amount of trees equals y'all's criteria of what cannot be removed. And if it is removed, this is what you have to do. So the two penalties is, like I said, you have to plant so many trees that equal that. And to give you an example, a 2-inch tree is what we require in developments now. That equals a half of a unit in Gwinnett County. And in Gwinnett County, you got to have 16 units of trees per acre. The bigger trees carry more units. And don't quote me on this, but I'm just going to go off memory. A 12-inch tree across from one side to the other carried, I think, 3.2 units if it was a hardwood. That's for 12 inches, which you know what 12 inches is. And then the bigger it went, the more units it carried. If it was a new tree, it carried half the units. So they have calculations. What's that? Stop me if I'm wrong. So what a lot of developers do, talking with some other engineers, is they'll go out and cut the trees down and just pay the fine. And there's a fine associated with that tree, and it's a very complicated fine. And I think one 36-inch tree in Gwinnett was $27,000 of penalties that goes into a tree account for that county to use in other places, or they can plant it in other projects. But then you got to have an advisory board that goes out and approves it. And the money has to be separated. That's where it gets kind of complicated. Anything can be done. It's just, do we want to get the staff to do that? I think if we keep it simple, keep it just to hardwoods and specialty trees over a certain measurement across, and go from there. And if they choose to cut it down, then they have to replant trees elsewhere on their property. There are exclusions for trees that can be cut down legally if their arborist says that they're in the more than 30% of decay. If it's a utility or a road going in there, they can remove them without being penalized. But just to go in and flat cut trees down, that's what we're looking at to regulate. And maybe instead of making the road go here, you make that road curves because you got this tree you got to worry about. And if there is a tree identified, they have to put a barrier around that tree, and nothing can be built within certain feet based on the type of tree it is. And that's also in Gwinnett's ordinance. It has to be so many feet away from a driveway, so many feet from the back of the house or any structure. So did I cover pretty much everything? And we've looked at Gwinnett County, Social Circle, Decatur, Covington, Madison, Monroe. A lot of cities use canopy. You gotta have so much canopy for the total project. Like in Decatur, they try to achieve 60% canopy in the entire city. And the canopy size is measured by the type of tree, the size of the tree, how long the tree's been there. You have to have an arborist on staff to do those type of measurements because it's an ongoing process. We just don't have the resources here to do that currently. Now, if the council says that's what they want to do, then we'll go out and hire an arborist. But, you know, I don't think that's the direction that I'm hearing from the three of y'all. But I'll leave that because I know y'all have a lot of questions.
In my research, a lot of what cities are kind of doing is they're requiring, especially for like new builds, new lots like that, to have a tree preservation plan submitted with their design plan or their before they can even get their land disturbance permit. And then they would have to go out and hire their own arborist and have that submitted. And in that would have the trees and all that. But then that would be on us, I guess, to go check behind that arborist, correct?
Well, we did discuss that, Tim and I. So there's two ways. You could either hire a firm to go back and validate what their arborist says, or you could do the honor system. You know, depending on how y'all want to do. But yes, we would say, we would hope y'all would say, based on this type of permit, anything over 5-acre land disturbance permits, you have to do a tree survey.
Okay.
And that's where they'd go
I
out
think
and
that's
say,
smart,
if y'all say in November's council meeting that y'all say anything over 30 inches oak wood or oak, anything 30 inches of hardwood has to be preserved. So they would have to go out and measure whatever y'all's requirements were and identify if any those trees exist. And if they say we have 3, but 2 of them are 50% dead, then we would have to see a certified arborist state that. And then the question y'all would have to answer is, do you want us to hire an arborist to validate that or just take them at their word?
Would they have a third-party arborist? Wouldn't their
Right.
license and all be on the line if they
It
get
is.
caught
I mean,
lying and
it's
stuff? Kind of
similar
like an engineer firm
to
with
when
detention ponds?
a plan is submitted, they have an engineer, a third-party engineer submit plans, and they stamp those plans, like, say, retention ponds and the depth and size of the pond, but we also send it to our engineer. They don't review the entire plan, they just look at the gist of it, right? And make sure they're in guidance. They don't look at every single detail, but they just kind of give a glimpse. So, yes, we could, you know, call an engineer firm, say, hey, do you have a landscape architect that could validate this? Or we could say, a third-party licensed arborist is good enough for us.
Does the county have a arborist on staff?
Gwinnett County?
Walton?
I don't believe, I don't know, I
Because,
want to
I mean, we
say,
have so many service contracts with.
yeah, I don't
Walton
believe
County.
they do, but I could be wrong. Reading Gwinnett's ordinance, they do, because it says staff arborist, so I would assume they have one. I know one time when I worked at Gwinnett, that they did have, for sure, landscape architects. So in their Gwinnett ordinance, it said either an architect could verify that or an arborist. So I know you can get your arborist license by taking some tests. We looked at that as well, and there's a lot of arborist cities that do have arborists. A lot of your cities that do have these tree ordinances do have arborists on staff, but that is a very limited position of work, I would
Right,
imagine.
well, that's what I was looking at that, because, you know, any of your tree removal services have an
They
arborist
do.
there. And I was wondering if we have a dual purpose, if one of our, we only have one code enforcement officer, but if somebody, maybe if we were gonna be thinking about in the future hiring another code enforcement officer, which I think we should, if we could maybe make that part of their requirement that they have.
Yeah, we discussed that, Tim and I did with, you know, because Tim's the one that brought up, you know, you just can't have an arborist, that's all he does, because there's not
No,
enough
I
work.
think a dual purpose.
But, you know, then again, when we looked at the arborists, there's certain criteria you gotta have. It was, Robbie, I believe, looked at it. Robbie, you remember, you had to have years' experience working, plus you had to pass, I think it was a test, right? There's not like a class you go, but it's just a test. But they also require so many hours of working in the field, which I don't know that qualify
Like
them here. But,
apprenticeship.
you know, if that's what the direction I would suggest, we would contact a third-party arborist and just say, hey, because we, you know, we're only talking about how many plants a year we get for land disturbance.
Well, I mean, every development
Right.
has land disturbances very every year.
But anything over like 5 acres, how many do we have, you think? Yeah, so I think just for
Okay.
that, we would sub that out. I know some of your engineer firms have architects on staff. Of course, they would be more money than an arborist, but, you know, like Melanie said, we could contact the local North American Tree Service. I know them. I know they have arborists on staff. That's who we use for trees, and anytime we cut a tree, they come in with an arborist and say, yeah, this tree needs to be removed.
Well, I know it sounds like a silly idea, but we have our record services on a rotation staff. We could go to each of these
Yeah.
that have business, that deal business in the city, because I use a different service than you do, and give them all an opportunity, and each project that comes up, we rotate around, and
We
then,
could, as long as they meet the, you know, the
Right.
criteria y'all set, sure. So, but our mind can go looking at the tree ordinances to keep it as simple as possible, not to get into measuring all the trees, but, you know, identify the trees that really,
The heritage trees,
yeah, you know,
the ones bigger than
this, you know,
30
like a
inches.
Japanese maple is different than a pine tree. But a 100-year-old oak tree is a pecan tree, you know, those are valuable trees. And they also help with the next thing that we're gonna be talking about next month is retention. They absorb water, like Melanie brought up, especially in the buffer zone. So we'll leave it for y'all to give us ideas of what you'd like to see in the ordinance.
well, you answered one of my questions a while ago, because I asked, since Precision Planning was working on our detention, would they be writing this ordinance for us? So are we,
I think it'll be a group effort between us and, I don't know if it would be Jimmy Parker or someone in office, but he has already sent me a proposal, but I haven't moved forth because, you know, you may say we don't need it, and then I
Right.
wouldn't want to waste the money, so. But I think y'all want it, and I told him just give me a few days. We told him about this meeting. He couldn't be here today. He's out of town, but we are meeting with him. Staff's meeting with him next week, I believe, so that can be a discussion we can have with him.
so we're not getting into the specifics today as to what size trees and everything. We're just trying to find out if, between the three of us as a committee, if this is
Yeah.
something we want to move forward
And
with.
if there's something that you specifically want to see, you know, that would help us now versus
Right.
come back in November saying, gosh, I wish we'd have known this.
Well, I read probably 40 or 50, because I read Fulton County, Gwinnett County, DeKalb County. I read just everybody I could find. And there seems to be a varying range, but, because like you and I talked, the measurement is called DBH, which is diameter breast height.
Right.
And, you know, I would want to be on the lower end of that for the hardwoods, which what I saw is the average was between 24 and 27 inches. So I'd like to stay more on that 24-inch. And then all of your historical trees, your specialty trees, like, again, the ginkgo tree at the Charlie Kelly's place, that should have never been cut down. So I would want to, even though that might not have fit in the size thing, it was still a significant tree or a specialty tree. I would like to save those. I know there's been some talk about the pecan trees. Skip just asked me, pecan trees are considered hardwoods.
Yep.
And you and I talked about that. And while they are a tree that there's an abundance of, I don't want to see all of them cut down, but I understand some of them would have to be cut down for a project to occur. And you and I talked about that's when they would then have to replace it with certain
Right.
number of trees to replace that. But I would not want them to go in there and go, oh, this is a pecan grove and there's 50 trees here. I think we're okay cutting them all. I still would like to save a good portion of those trees. And so I guess we need to, we'll need to work on what we want to do with that. But I do think we need to preserve the trees, not just for the citizens here today, but we've got to look forward to the generations coming behind us. And you cannot go into a city or a town and just take all the trees, because the 2-inch trees we're gonna plant, they are gonna take 100, 200 years to
Yes,
grow.
right. And I think, Melanie, to answer your question, I think, and this is, getting into a little bit legal, but I believe we can say, after the survey comes in, you can only remove so much percentage of those for infrastructure, for roads. Does Gwinnett have that? Or so much percentage can be moved, or they just got a flat fine? You can remove them, but you're gonna pay. Yeah, so you think we could do a percentage, no more than regardless? Maybe without utilities, because I know everything I read was about utilities was exempt, and disease. So maybe we can say minus disease trees plus where the utilities are going, the road is going. Outside of that, you can only remove X percentage. So if you got 10 trees, 10% of them can be removed, right? Fine. That still would leave you 8 trees or 9 trees. So we could look at that, or make it a fine where it would not be lucrative for them to cut that
All right,
tree.
but you and I also talked about, we don't want this to be
No,
seen,
I
we're not
don't.
trying to make this a money-making opportunity. This is truly about saving trees.
It is.
So, and a lot of developers, they don't care, they'll throw the money at it to be able to clear cut something. So I don't know that, yes, we need to have a fine, as you say, but that's not what this is about. This
Right.
is about
And
a whole other
also, just for
critter.
the record, the way I read Gwinnett's is if you're an R100, which is residential, you're exempt from the tree ordinance. So a private property owner, say if I had, as a citizen of Loganville, I had 30 acres and I want to go and cut it, I could without any penalty. And then turn around and zone it 2 months later, 2 days later. There is some clause in there that says if a private owner does do a clear cut, then it's 24 months, it cannot ask for a rezone. So that's another issue y'all can think about, because that's a little, I don't want to call it a loophole, but, I think other council members don't want this to see penalizing the residents if you have a half-acre tract that you can't cut a tree that you feel is going to fall on your house.
Yeah.
I think this ordinance is meant just for large land development, not y'all's houses are, acre to a quarter of an acre or whatever you live on.
Yeah.
That wouldn't fall, this ordinance wouldn't affect that. It's only for land use or land disturbance permits that are more than X amount of land. Because we got to put a percentage on it, because out on your street, there was, 3 acres that got subdivided into 3 homes or whatever it was.
Yeah, and they clear cut some
Right, so you
trees
got
that
to
2
think
people
about.
couldn't reach around.
You gotta think about that too, so whatever you make it the minimum, if they fall under that, they can do what they wish. And I don't think we wanna get into regulating where you can't cut a single tree down on your property just because you wanna cut it. I don't think we wanna go there. But that's for y'all's consideration, not mine. That would be harder to enforce on us, because what's gonna happen is somebody's gonna call on their neighbors, hey, they cut their tree down last week, and then what are we gonna do to enforce it? Now you gotta pay $30,000 to plant that tree? I don't think that's gonna happen. So I think this should only be towards developers and people looking to develop their land within more than a certain size acreage. I think it needs to be,
Okay.
at least 5 acres or more.
So we'd be looking more into
But-
the tree preservation plan to be submitted before, the heritage trees, 24 inches or higher, are according to the DBH. And then, they have to put a fence around it, around the half-critical root zone, mulch, water weekly, just that kind of going, just for
Yeah, I
the
don't know
bigger
if
lots.
We would use the DBH, Gwinnett uses just a 4 feet. Because, Tim and I said, well, if you get somebody that's 4 foot 10 inches versus somebody that's 6 foot,
Yeah,
that
it's
can
a-
make a difference.
If
But if you
you-
just say X amount of feet from the ground, from the soil level up, that's where you take your measurement
Yeah,
from.
and the DBH formula is 4.5 feet.
Okay.
So
Now,
that
when
would
you-
be,
When you just said put a fence around it, Water Weekly, you're talking about during the development process.
Well, you gotta have
To
the-
keep
you have to have the
you're talking about
fence up
the
before.
orange fence, the barricade
Well, there
fence.
wasn't no watering that I read, unless I didn't read that. There was a
For-
protective fence.
For heritage trees, you do the half-critical root zone, which is another measurement
Mm-hmm.
for that. So once you know that, you have to fence it off, add
Right.
mulch on top, And then you can do vertical mulch or something, because different trees require different things. So the arborist will let you know when they do the critical tree plan, what you would have to do to protect this tree, and they'd have to follow that plan. And a lot of it has, you have to water weekly, not just before, but during construction, because they're gonna mess up the outer roots.
Yeah, and
But the critical zone is what's the most important, so if they keep that watered and mulch, the tree has a surviving chance.
And there's also, like roads, there would be a bond for the tree for X amount of time. I would suggest, what would we say, 2 years? 2 years after that project's complete, they have 2 years after that. So they get a final plat from that day, 2 years out, that tree has to remain living. If it dies, it's on the developer's responsibility to replace. Now, if it's a 30-inch oak tree, he cannot replace a 30-inch oak tree. You can't just go buy those. So he would have to come up, we would have to come up with a formula that equates to, maybe it's 9 2-inch ball trees planted somewhere on that property, which would be a little bit harder to do because it's already developed. So that's something else to think about. Or we could say 12 months. I mean, you can do anything. You don't have to do it at all, but a lot of the cities I read do have a bond for a tree as part of the bond ordinance, or not bond ordinance, but part of the bond for the development. So if they don't replace that tree, then the city would cash out that bond to have a contractor go replace it. But if it's already developed, I don't think you can have 12 trees planted somewhere.
okay, I have a question. I know there's lots of trees that their roots come above the ground. So how does that fall into if there's a big tree
Well,
that we want
the
to preserve.
arborist would come in, I guess, and he would tell you what you have to do to preserve that.
Yeah, they
I mean,
would
you
have
might
a
have to bring
plan.
in dirt, you might have to bring in soil and cover those roots.
The arborist would also read that there's a guideline as far as like pruning, and that it was referenced in multiple zonings or ordinances. So I'd imagine the arborist would tell you, this tree needs X to maintain survival. And that's why they put a fence so nobody is driving over the roots, breaking the roots, accidentally rubbing the tree.
Or anything on the
Yeah,
ground.
and actually,
near
the only
tree.
way a tree can be saved, and that would be written in our thing, is that arborist has to say that this tree has at least a 10-year life beyond today. So, they may look at that and go, well, with these root, you don't know. So, I
Yeah.
think it would fall on that arborist to do that evaluation.
Yeah, they may say that this tree needs to be removed. It's gonna,
Well, I mean, an
Walton
example
County
is-
Courthouse just removed 3 of
Yeah.
those massive oak trees because an arborist came in and said, this tree is gonna fail within a matter of years.
Well, the tree in Snellville, that when they built the
Right.
Walmart, they had to save that tree. And now, all these years later, they ended up having to cut the tree down because it turns out it had carpenter ants in it.
Right.
So the arborist came out and it was deemed not safe. And unfortunately, that majestic tree had to come down. So,
Okay. So y'all like 24 inches?
I like
hardwoods,
24 inches
and
hardwoods, yeah.
I don't think it needs to be 24 inches for specialty trees because those are different diameters, so that would have to fall on the arborist.
Well, is specialty trees fall under with like indigenous and things like that, or is that just gonna be a specialty tree?
I think we would have to rely on the
Indigenous, a lot of
arborist.
Japanese
Well,
maples.
yeah,
Yes,
well,
fine.
They're
that,
not
and you got
indigenous.
dogwoods, and that's what I'm thinking, so you go down to a bit much smaller tree for your specialty trees
Right,
and
it
your
couldn't be
things.
24 inch, right.
And then even the softwoods, are we even gonna regulate the pine trees at anything, or they can cut down a pine tree even if it's 4 foot in diameter, or what are we gonna?
Well, those tiny trees don't get that big.
Tim wants to talk.
Hey, the ones in my yard, it takes 2 people to reach around.
So reading these ordinances, they basically had 2 different measurements. You had a canopy measurement and you had a unit measurement. So on the canopy measurement, you had to have a certain amount of canopy per property. On the unit measurements was based on the number of trees and the tree size. So I would rather go with a unit measurement if you're wanting to save trees versus a canopy. You know what I mean? Because you just have more control over the individual trees. And in the unit measurements, like in Gwinnett County's ordinance, you had different units of credit for softwood versus hardwood. So it would be saving pine trees at a lower rate than it would be hardwood trees. So, but there is a provision in there for softwoods. And then Specialty trees is a whole separate, you know, they have a list, Gwinnett County has a list of what they consider specialty trees.
And they update that on their website, correct? So homeowners or anyone can
Yeah.
go look at that.
But it just depends on how y'all want to do it.
With specialty trees, though, that would just be completely up to the arborist. We wouldn't have to have a tree board or anything like that.
No, but it would be
You'd have to have a
best
tree
for us
board.
to have a list of specialty trees, you know, and it doesn't have to be all inclusive of, you know, every kind of tree there is, but, you know, trees like this type, you know.
You know, I know we're all
Yeah.
human. Say we miss one on the specialty trees, would be something hard to go on later and add it to it?
No.
Okay.
Remove anything, anytime.
Okay.
The one
I didn't
comment
know
that
the process it would be to add a tree or take a tree off if it was a huge.
You talking about the list itself?
Yeah, the list itself, because, you know, we might think of all the special trees we can think of, and then some exotic tree comes up that we, oh, that's a beautiful
Let me
tree.
clarify though, because if somebody pulls a permit and they do what we ask them to based on the current standard.
Yeah, it wouldn't go
And then
back
we find out that,
retroactive.
hey, this XY tree is on their property and we didn't list it, you couldn't make him or her.
Yeah,
So, but you can like, down the road, like, hey, we should add this. You can certainly add it then.
so keep it for the
If somebody already has
future.
a permit,
Yeah.
they would be grandfathered in. And there was a grandfather clause in Gwinnett's too, was it 24 months? After 24 months, that grandfather clause went away. So,
So we're looking at buy the units and doing it at 5 acres or more,
I mean, that's
just suggestion. And we're doing it through the tree preservation plan,
But now,
25-inch
if you-
heritage
if you
trees,
do-
hardwoods.
if you do write the ordinance for 5 acres or more, that's going to exempt a lot of commercial development.
Yeah, I
There's
would
a lot
be
of
willing to
commercial
go with a
development's
smaller.
not that big, you know?
So it could be a half acre, an acre, or you could say anything and then zoning. Gwinnett does about zoning, right?
you could say all commercial and then have it separate for residents.
Well, your developers are coming in to build residential, so that's why we want to catch all of that as well, that they're not just,
But they'd have to have a land district,
Land
disturbance
acres.
ordinance.
Or you just could leave it as anything that's requiring a land disturbance or development permit has to adhere
I
to.
Any
like
new
that
home
better.
built.
Yeah, I like that. Any land disturbance permit, they have to adhere.
Trees at your house without a permit,
Right.
Right.
but, you know, if you want.
But if I'm gonna build 3 houses on my, yes.
Then you'd be,
Mhm.
Locked in.
Because right now, a commercial piece of property only has to be 30,000 square feet, which is just a little over half acre.
And I do like what Danny said earlier, if, let's just say I rezone my property, because I think I'm gonna be able to squeeze 5 houses in there, and I decide, well, I know I'm gonna do that, but I go and I clear cut my thing, and then I come in for a rezoning. I like what you said, that I can't ask for a rezone within 24 months. I do like that.
I want to say as much as 3 years to as much as 12 months. There was different cities had different ones. I want to say Decatur was 3 years, there was Max, I think, or maybe it was Madison. But one of them had 3 years, some of them had 24 months. So
But-
yes, you can put that caveat that
But how would we know when they cut the trees down, especially if it's just a private individual? Say, I went and cut all my trees down. We have, let's say Josh ride by and go, oh, they cut their trees down and I saw it on this date. And we have to just remember, like, we can't hear anything on that property, or?
then I would suggest that we come up with a land clearing permit that they would have to, right now, you can, the Highway 78 property across from Logan Ford, sold their timber.
Microphone,
Is not,
there.
the land on 78, you know, they cleared the timber many years ago, but that's, doesn't require a permit. So we can make it a requirement that you have to get a permit through
Well,
the
that would
city.
make it easier to keep track of when the
That-
trees were cut.
That's where I'm going, yes. So if that's something y'all want to see, we could add that to the
I
process
mean,
and
that could
then,
just be as matter as they come up here and get a permit, and it's a very minimal
Could be
fee. It's not
$25
an
permit
exorbitant
fee,
fee that's gonna
right.
cost somebody a lot of money. It's just
Right.
basically for us to do a record keeping, keeping track.
And if you hire a company, like say Northern Tree or something, they would know, we have to get these permits before we
Right.
can cut your trees.
Was that already zoned commercial though? Wasn't it? It wasn't zoned residential? Yeah. So, so that was already zoned commercial, so I don't know how that would work. The ordinance is anything zoned residential that does clearing, that was the grandfather, you couldn't have it rezoned. But if it's already zoned commercial and they want to do clear cut, they would, if y'all put the tree ordinance, they couldn't do it without having, it's only for properties that are zoned residential. Because if you're already
What's,
zoned commercial and you come into a tree harvesting, you gotta do a tree plan. They couldn't do tree harvesting without going through this whole process. Because I think this ordinance would only be affecting properties not already, anything other than residential zoning. So your R44s, your R16s, your R22s, they could go in there and clear cut, but they wouldn't be able to have it rezoned for X amount of time if y'all do it. But on Porterfield's property, it was already zoned commercial. If this was in place, he couldn't have done that because it's already commercial property. You couldn't go in and clear cut it without identifying the trees. Am I saying that? Is that right? So I think if you're gonna put you can't ask for rezoning, it's only on properties currently residential properties. Does that make sense? And if you want to clear cut or thin, you have to get a permit. And then if you, by doing that, you're automatically locking yourself in for X amount of months for a rezone.
Yeah, I like that.
So what would y'all like to see, 24 months, 12 months?
I think if the max was 3 years, I'd go 3 years, but 24 months would be a good compromise on that.
Okay.
I mean, are y'all okay with the 24 months? Is that?
The question is, can you make that binding to, can that be, it's not a zoning condition because it's not going up for rezoning, would that carry with another property owner?
So say they sold the property, it would still.
That's
carry
what I'm
the
making sure,
property, not the
if Melanie owned a
owner.
property and clear cut it, and then I bought it from her, would I be held to that same standard in terms of
I
this?
think we gotta do that because.
Yeah,
I
I'm just
mean,
making sure
yeah.
legally we can do that.
And then, you talked about something a while ago, the 2-year tree bond. I liked the bond. I like to work that in there as well. Are y'all okay with working that in there? Where the tree, if the developer comes in and we tag all the trees, they clear the land, then they still have to have a 2-year bond. If that tree died as a result of the development, everything, then the city would take that money and replace the trees to compensate for that tree that died or was accidentally taken down, or however that works.
Well, we'd only take the money if they refused to.
Okay,
We would make them plant the trees. So we'd have to create a cost per tree. Now, would that be? Would that be on new trees they plant? And like in
Yeah,
the
the
HOA
way
properties?
The way Gwinnett County does it is, it's the cost of the trees plus labor.
But if you have an existing tree that we identified and we've, cordoned off to protect and it ended up dying,
And they have to replace equivalent.
right?
Where, like, if it was a 24-inch tree, they have to replace it, or so many trees to equal what that tree's units were.
Yeah.
Then it's the cost of the trees plus labor.
But what if it's on a private property, on a house lot?
All property's private property if the city don't own it.
Yeah, but if it's an HOA, then that's on the developer, like the roads. That's still his until we take ownership. But if it's on a house that he's already sold it, can that still be enforced? Because the way I read it, it was just it was in the common areas, like the
Like it's a
HOA
tree
owned
farm.
areas. It wasn't
So it's a
on,
roof that we
like if
could
there's a
pay.
24-inch tree that's on they're building half-acre lots and they can fit that tree on that house and they sell that house to me. Now, I'm the property owner and it dies because whatever, how are we gonna hold that developer
Yeah, I
responsible?
could say it's a 24 unit tree and they gotta do, it was that 12 trees or replace a 24 if they're 2-inch each that they gotta replace with. 12 trees, not one island ain't gonna fit really, you know?
Well, it's not gonna be, under the units, it's not a inch by inch replacement. You get so many units or credits for that size tree, and they would have to replace whatever the unit is for that tree. And the way they do the bank in Gwinnett County, it's the cost of the trees plus the labor. That's why that one, was it 36-inch oak tree comes up to $27,000, because that's the cost of the trees they would have to plant to replace that, plus the labor to plant the trees.
So we'd have to place it on property on city property or something? Or we pay a tree bank to plant them in another county or something?
I mean, you could do, what was the terminology they used for that? Wasn't the tree bank, it was, hold on just a second, let me find it.
Walking off 2 hours.
No,
But we're not doing units per acre though.
I'm on minutes.
I would rather do units per acre.
How's that on say 24-inch trees?
So at the table, you don't see each other.
Round table, no.
They got so many other trees they.
Yeah, they call it off-site planting, to plant it somewhere else. That was one of the two options in their tree bank, was they pay money or do the off-site planting option. I mean, that's just something we're gonna have to look at and figure out how to word that, you know. If the tree's on a piece of property that they sell and it falls under that bond, would we plant it back on that property or plant it on the green space? Or, you know, that's just something we'll have to figure out.
Okay, I have a question. Okay, so we have a developer come in and build a subdivision. They do everything they're supposed to do. All the houses are sold, but then down the road, within that 2 years, we have some trees that have a problem. That developer's not here anymore. He's gone
Well,
south.
we have a bond
Yeah.
So we
for
hold
the
their
trees.
bond
for 2 years,
Only
yeah.
2 years.
for 2 years. Okay,
Just
but
like
after
we
that 2
do,
years,
just like we do the
then-
maintenance bonds on developments.
But after the 2 years, then it's, whatever
Yeah.
happens, happens.
Yep.
There'd be exclusions too, like if a storm came and knocked it down, you couldn't take his money. Or if lightning hit it. But, you know, there would be exceptions to use that bond money. I would imagine that's what y'all would do. But also what Tim, so y'all also know is, you know, we start talking about not cutting anything 24 inches, but if we go with the unit and say you gotta have so many units per acre, as long as they maintain that units, then they could cut certain trees down. But they still gotta maintain X amount of units. So that's, when that does do that, I believe there's just 16 units per acre. But if you have, say, it's not gonna happen, but if you had 10 acres of nothing but hardwoods, you could cut down a lot because you would maintain that 16 units per acre.
But a unit is not necessarily a tree, it's the
No.
equivalent of what that tree is valued at,
Yes.
like how many units they
Right, a
get
big
that.
24-inch tree may only be 4 units, so you gotta have, you know, 4 of those. But you may have 6, 2 could go.
Yeah.
So
I
you
mean, we
wanna,
can't make it so restrictive that they can't cut down a tree
Right.
and do their development. But we can, word it to where the bigger trees would be a priority over,
So we do units, and then say a heritage tree is over 40 or 50, maybe a heritage tree would then get extra protection?
Yes.
Okay. So we do units other than heritage trees.
So a 24-inch tree, hardwood, carries 9.3 units in Gwinnett. A 3-inch tree carries 0.75, 4 inches, 0.9. But if you go up to, say, a 50-inch tree, that is 40.8 units. So if you had one 50-inch tree, that would cover, 3 acres of land. And they can cut everything else down. But they're going to maintain, so
But they're gonna save that,
one big one.
Yeah.
So.
that one 50-inch tree, which is a
That's
huge.
huge.
And then if they plant a tree as a replacement, a 2-inch caliber is only a half of a unit. You don't get to 1 unit until you get 6 inches or bigger in diameter of a tree. So that's, like this. So you really get penalized for cutting trees down if you replace it with new trees because the figures goes extremely. A 15-inch caliper tree carries 2.7 units. So if they cut down one.
Replant.
To replant, yeah.
Yeah.
So,
Tim, if a developer is charged a fine, do you have to take that in front of the judge, like other fines?
Well, in this ordinance, it's not necessarily a fine. They have to pay that money into the tree bank. So it's not a fine like a court citation fine.
Okay, so you would not have to take it in front of a judge.
No. Yeah.
Good.
But that money, it's my understanding, has to go into a separate special account for that tree bank.
But for this group, I know we don't want to make money on fines, and that's always true, but you also got to make a fine that's a deterrent to just wiping them out. I mean, if it's what you want.
Well, I mean,
Say
cost,
$5,000, the developer will just,
the cost of
What I
the
said, these
tree,
developers, that's, you can't probably put a price restrictive fee on there, because if they wanna clear cut the land to do that, so there's gotta be something here that's gonna stop them from doing that.
well, the calculation they had in the Gwinnett ordinance, the way they had it calculated, the cost of the tree plus the installation, the cost of the installation of the tree was pretty hefty, so. I mean, you paying for a 24-inch tree, I think was it 24 or?
this is 36.
Yeah, 36-inch tree, it was $28,000.
Yeah, so the credit for a 36-inch tree was 28.4 units. Let's verify that. $28.4. And then if you replace it with a 3-inch caliper of trees at 0.6, so you'd have to do 28.4 units times 2 equals 56 times the replacement tree of $94.66. I'm sorry, that's 94 trees you'd have to replace for that one tree. At $250 a tree, that's $23,750.
So I have another question. So the developers that we have seen already in Gwinnett County that have clean cut everything, who went in there and said, okay, how would they know how much they're gonna have to be penalized for clear cutting? Did somebody go in there and count the trees and measure the trees, or was it just a set fee to clear cut?
Well, they would have to show you on their plan before they ever get a land disturbance permit of what trees they're gonna remove. I mean, they would have to show you,
Wow.
because if we do like Gwinnett does 16 units per acre is what they have to have, then that arborist plan is gonna show how many trees they have, the units per acre, and what trees they're taking down. Now, if they just go in and start cutting trees that they're not supposed to cut, because they got to put up the orange fence to protect the trees, if they go in and just start cutting trees they're not supposed to cut, then they're going to get a stop work order until it gets figured out. You know what I mean? So,
So before they go in there and start cutting trees down, they've already gotten the permit, they've already gotten everything settled before they start cutting down any trees, as far as that goes?
yes,
As far as clearing the land goes?
yes. The first thing they're gonna have to do is submit the plan from the arborist.
For NARS. So does that mean we still gonna have to hire somebody to do that? Or
Unless
like
y'all wanna
Brandon
be
or-
on the honor system with them, and I don't know if y'all wanna do that.
I think if there's
Because
a
we know how
third-party
developers-
arborist with this license on the
We know how
line-
developers act sometimes, so.
Well, you can say a third party, it has to be a
Yeah.
third party arborist, it cannot be an arborist that, say if it's a D.R. Horton, they can't have a D.R. Horton arborist do it. It has to be a third party licensed arborist, independent, to do a survey of the land. It has to show the trees, show what they're saving and what they're removing. And it has to show that that equals the units per acre that y'all set. So, do y'all like the 16 units per acre?
And then on top of that, if we're going to subcontract with like arborists from tree companies or something like he was talking about, then for the city, they will go in and verify what they submitted is correct.
I think if we have a third party submit the tree report, then we might not need to
They're
send the
still working
verify.
for the developer. I mean, it's up to y'all. You know.
And do we know how much
I'm not
they
real big
charge
on
to
the honor
do that?
system, but, you know.
I don't really see so much of the honor system if it's a third party, because their license will be on the
But
line.
if I'm paying you, I want you to favor me.
Yeah, I know, that's true.
So,
Well, that's why I was wondering,
don't-
could we create a rotation, like any arborist in the area that does work, we create they have to rotate whoever's next on the list, that's who they have to use. I mean, can we work something
that's
out
who
like that?
they have to use?
Well, I know they're the one paying it, but if we're doing it because with the city's checking on them, we can't send somebody out. We don't have an arborist on
I don't know
staff.
if we could do
I
that.
don't think you can require them to use our contractor, but
Yeah.
we could use a rotating list for
Okay.
us.
Right.
But I couldn't say,
You have to
mayor has to use
person.
this.
So, you're asking about for them to come up with their plan? Is that what, because I'm confused
Yeah,
now on
he
what
was
was on
asking
that.
about them coming up with
Okay.
their plan.
Their plan, yes,
and
their plan would have to-
I was talking about us contracting, if y'all don't wanna hire somebody to do this, contracting with a third party, like arborists that work for tree
Okay,
companies
I'm
or
back with you
whatever,
now.
to go out for the city and verify what they turned in as being correct. Versus just taking their word for it.
Well, we know the honor system doesn't work because we had a developer that said he would save a tree and he did not, so I'm not for the honor system.
We also had one that said they were gonna build, a senior community that didn't too.
Yeah.
So,
Exactly.
So you only get credit for existing trees 3 inches or larger. Ain't gonna- That's not included in the buffer, though. The buffer, you can get all the credit. So that's another thing, let me say that too, because while we're trying to be as much information, if you have a property that's on a creek and you have a 50-foot buffer, he might, or they might be able to cut all the trees down outside that buffer because they will maintain the units per acre in that buffer. If it's heavily, heavily with the trees, so if you have a creek bottom, more than likely you're gonna have some big trees that carry a lot of units. So just know that. So there's not nothing that I've seen that keeps people from just going in and saying you can't cut trees down. There are always ways that can cut trees, but you try to make it as favorable not to cut them by doing, the pay, the penalty, planting trees elsewhere. But at the end of the day, if you want to, you can. It's your property. But just know if they have a buffer, creek bottom with a lot of trees, and that's 50 feet on both sides, or 75 feet, right? It's 50. It's a lot of trees. And those trees may be enough to count for the other property that they do clear cut. Example, Claude Brewer. They have a lot of creek bottom with a lot of trees. I walked it, a lot of big trees. They might not have been able to cut all the trees in that 100 acres, but they might have been 90 acres to being clear cut. So just know that too. There is no ordinance that I've seen that says no trees, period.
But heritage trees, you could if it's over a larger diameter though, correct? Like, if it's over this, you can't touch it no matter what.
I've not seen that nowhere, that you couldn't absolutely cut it. There was a penalty associated with it, but at the end of the day, you could. Have you seen anything that says absolutely not? I even think we get to specialty trees in here.
But, you know, if you set the penalty high enough, then you can deter them from it. But at the end of the day,
You're right.
if they throw enough money at it, they'll be able to cut it down, no matter. I mean, you could say, this tree's gonna cost you $100,000 if you cut it down. Well, if they wanna cut it down bad enough, they give you $100,000, they can cut it down, you know, so. You just have to write an ordinance where it, you know, deters them from doing that. You know, and you can put a higher price on specialty trees than regular trees, you know what I mean?
So Gwinnett's 28 inch for hardwoods, 30 inch for large wood, which is, large softwoods, and then native flowering is 12 inches for specimen tree identification. I think we just go with
Which a 12-inch dogwood is an old tree.
the very old tree. You know, I think what we do is take y'all's comments to the engineers, see what they can come up with between him and Tim, and maybe have a rough draft that we can kind of send out prior and say, hey, what do y'all think about this? And, you know, we're like to get it done right the first time, as you all would.
Should it go through
And just,
planning and zoning?
You know, kind of start with 16 units, if you're okay with that. Keep it modeled maybe after Gwinnett. Or just say, you just want to not do units and say anything over 24 inches hardwood really, really needs to be saved.
Are we gonna try to do the moratorium at next week's meeting?
We need.
Yeah, we'll have to, if y'all want it.
I would think you'd wanna go 90 days to get us out of January.
Yeah, I was thinking to go
January's-
not to keep the moratorium through the first of the year.
Because I'd like to send it through planning and zoning as well, so they could take a look at it, and I know that would take an extra month, correct?
But it's not a planning and zoning
It's
regulation,
not under one of theirs,
Yeah.
okay,
because you're not changing the zoning.
just be adding to it.
If we
So-
do a 90-day moratorium, anything that you've already got plans on is not involved.
Correct.
So, do y'all want to do just anything hardwood, anything over this, or units per acre?
I like anything hardwood, a certain size, but
What size?
24 inches.
Okay, so what we'll do is, we'll talk with Jimmy. We'll say, hey, he knows Gwinnett's, and we'll say, you write that down for me, 24 inches hardwood. What about softwood? 36 inches, 48 inches?
I
mean, it has to
had
be-
30 inches, but what do
Okay.
y'all have on softwoods?
I personally hate pine trees, so if I had a property with a bunch of pine trees, that's one of the first things I do is take out the pine. But,
I mean, pine trees are notorious for,
Right, for breaking and
Snapping
everything,
and
but I'm
breaking
talking about,
doors.
you're talking about a big tree that's a couple hundred years old, so, you know,
So
yeah, so
36 inches?
it'd have to be big.
yeah.
36 inches and 24.
You're not gonna find many 36-inch
Come to
saws.
my
No, you're
house,
not.
come to my house and you'll find one.
Well, it may fall anytime.
But I
Well, it's leaning.
I measured the two in my front yard, and they were both at the DVH at 24.
And then, instead of reinventing the wheel, we'll use Gwinnett's conversion table for that hardwood to, if it gets removed, or softwood. Are y'all okay with that?
Well, tentatively, yeah, what we'd
Right, I
wanna
mean,
look
just
over,
to get
yeah,
something in
yeah.
writing.
To give him
Okay.
something to start working
Um,
with.
This will only affect properties that would require land disturbance permit, correct? And also, any residential property that thins or clear cuts would be 24 months from asking for a rezoning? Okay. So we're gonna have to make tree clearing a permitted item for anybody, so we can keep track of it. And $50 permit fee, cover man hours. $25 permit fee. Okay.
That's about the
Do I hear that?
I'm sorry, can you repeat that?
$25 permit fee for,
Yeah, because it's just basically a.
so now we're gonna make
It's
that a
just basically
requirement.
a paper trail, so.
Yeah, for anybody that wants to clear cut or thin, they have to get a permit regardless of where they are, who they are.
Even if just one tree in your yard, you have to get a permit?
Yeah, but I mean, $25 is nothing, like I said, it's just a,
Well, that means
keeping a
lot of
paper
people
trail.
Just won't get it. We know that.
Yeah, you just probably wouldn't get that right.
You just can't
Yeah,
control
no.
what somebody's gonna do.
But I don't think we're too worried about the local residents cutting trees as much as we are developers coming in. Anything else?
Not until
And
we
then you wanna
see more.
say a 90-day moratorium?
I would think you'd want to.
Yeah, I was
January.
thinking till, I mean, it's gonna be slow from now to the end of the year anyway, but at least to the end of the year, like, if Brandon wanted, like you said, have other people look at it and things, it gives us a little bit of time, breathing room, and we're not gonna have to come in
Give us
here
some time.
and ask
This is
for
last month for
a
rezoning,
longer
isn't it?
time.
Isn't this last month for rezoning?
Yeah, so this is the last month that anybody can rezone because planning commission don't meet in November or December. But you will have something come before you in November that could be affected by this.
Well.
So they could ask for a rezone, they just couldn't get permits for
We've
land
already got their
disturbance.
plans, though.
No.
No, the only thing we have is annexation and rezone applications.
So this would affect that property.
That has nothing to do with
Right.
So we,
development
the
permits.
tree ordinance, because we're doing the moratorium, we'll hold that up so that the properties that are
Yes,
asking
they
would
can-
fall under the new. Okay.
Yes, so they can still get a rezone and annexation if you all approve. They just wouldn't be able to submit plans to the planning to build until the moratorium.
Okay.
Okay,
90 days or if you lift it sooner.
that shouldn't be bad for them, you know.
So they already,
No, 'cause that's
they
all
already
about
got
being
60
If
days.
we got things settled quicker, could we move it up? I mean, if we didn't need the whole 90 days.
You can, if come November, if we're ready to submit, we can definitely, or I mean, December.
Yeah.
It won't be November, but December? Sure. That's up to you.
Okay.
Or you can do the opposite. Hey, we're not gonna be ready by January. We need to go 30 more days.
Okay.
So, a couple things, motion to create a tree ordinance.
Okay, I make a motion that we allow Danny and Tim and whoever else is involved in it to make a tree ordinance for the city and to bring before the council Thursday, November,
Might take a while.
Well, if we do 90 days, it'll be in, what?
December?
January?
January?
I think it's either December or January. I have to look and see where 90
Okay.
days is.
Okay. All right, so that's my motion.
Second.
December.
All in favor? Aye. All opposed?
And then you like to see a 90-day moratorium on land disturbance permit.
Yep. Okay, I also would like to see, move it to a 90-day moratorium. And then if things progress faster than we think, we can always change it up. But for right now, 90 days. Is that okay?
Oh, you got it? Okay. Is that a form of a motion?
Yeah, that's my motion. Thank you.
Second?
All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed?
All right, so just to recap, we're gonna come back to y'all in December with a tree ordinance, if not sooner, but we'll say December. And we're gonna go before, all this will be on next week's agenda for approval. But this is to move forward with
Right.
going before the council next month. And then y'all would put this in place as a whole, if it passes.
And you'll have a packet of this committee's, what they're interested in as part of the packet for next week's meeting.
Well, I don't know if we have it ready by then, but we can definitely talk about it again. I think that would come under Linda's reports, that we had a committee meeting. The committee voted in favor of having Tim and myself create a tree ordinance, and I would like a motion on that, then y'all would all vote. And then next thing would be like, with that, I would like to make a motion that we have a 90-day moratorium
Okay.
to allow them to do this And then y'all would all vote on that, and then once that's approved, then that's the official for us to get started.
Okay,
This is just the approval to take it to the council next month,
okay.
or next week, I mean.
Sounds good. Okay, anybody else have anything else they want to talk about or say, or no complaints, just, okay?
Nope.
Well, then I make a motion to adjourn this meeting.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Okay, meeting's adjourned.